The rain hammered against the windshield as I drove through the winding roads of Pine Valley, Ohio. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, but I couldn't help it. This was the last time I'd be making this drive to see Grandma Rose. "She doesn't have much time left, honey," Mom had said over the phone 3 days ago, her voice cracking. "The doctors say maybe a week, 2 at most." I dropped everything in Chicago and driven the 8 hours straight through. Work could wait. My marketing job at the advertising agency would have to survive without me for a while. Family came first, especially Grandma Rose. The old Victorian house came into view, its paint peeling and shutters hanging crooked. Dad's pickup truck was already in the driveway, along with Mom's sedan. I parked behind them and took a deep breath before stepping into the cold October air. Inside, the house felt different. The usual smell of Grandma's lavender cookies was replaced by the sterile scent of medical equipment. Tubes and monitors surrounded the hospital bed that had been set up in what used to be her cozy living room. "Katie!" Mom rushed over and pulled me into a tight hug. Her eyes were red and puffy. "I'm so glad you made it." Dad stood by the window, his weathered hands shoved deep in his pockets. He worked construction his whole life, and it showed in every line on his face. "She's been asking for you," he said quietly. I approached the bed slowly. Grandma Rose looked so small under the white blankets, nothing like the vibrant woman who used to chase me around her garden when I was little. Her silver hair was spread across the pillow, and her breathing was shallow but steady. "Grandma," I whispered, taking her frail hand in mine. Her eyes fluttered open, and despite everything, she managed a weak smile. "Katie, sweetheart, you came." "Of course I came. I wouldn't be anywhere else." She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "I need to tell you something important. About the house, about everything." Mom stepped forward, worry creasing her forehead. "Mom, you shouldn't strain yourself. The lawyer explained everything already. We know you don't have much left after all the medical bills." Grandma's eyes flashed with something I couldn't quite identify. Frustration? Sadness? "Patricia, you don't understand. There are things you don't know." "What things, Grandma?" I asked, leaning closer. But before she could answer, a coughing fit seized her. The nurse, a kind woman named Beverly who'd been staying around the clock, rushed over with water and medication. "She needs to rest now," Beverly said gently but firmly. "Too much excitement isn't good for her." I squeezed Grandma's hand one more time. "I'll be right here when you wake up, okay?" She nodded and closed her eyes, but not before giving me a look that seemed to say, "Remember this conversation." That evening, as we sat around the kitchen table picking at takeout from the local diner, the reality of the situation hit us hard. Mom had been handling Grandma's finances for the past 2 years, ever since Grandma started getting confused about bills and appointments. "The house is mortgaged to the hilt," Mom said, pushing her meat loaf around her plate. "Between the medical expenses and the reverse mortgage she took out 5 years ago, there's nothing left. We'll be lucky if we can afford a decent funeral." Dad nodded grimly. "Your grandmother lived through the Depression, Katie. She never trusted banks much, always kept cash hidden around the house. But we've looked everywhere. Found maybe $300 in coffee cans and old purses." "What about her jewelry?" I asked. "She always wore that beautiful emerald ring and had those pearl earrings." "Costume jewelry," Mom sighed. "We had them appraised last month. Worth maybe $50 total. She must have sold the real stuff years ago to pay bills." The weight of it all settled over us like a heavy blanket. Grandma Rose had raised 5 children in this house after Grandpa died young in a factory accident. She'd worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and taking in sewing during the day. She'd sacrificed everything for her family. "It just doesn't seem fair," I said, staring at the faded family photos covering the refrigerator. "She worked so hard her whole life." "That's life, sweetheart," Dad said, reaching over to pat my hand. "Some people struggle their whole lives and never catch a break. Your grandmother was one of the good ones, but good doesn't always mean easy." Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked and settled around me as I lay in my old bedroom upstairs. The walls were still covered with posters from high school, and my desk held books from college I'd never bothered to take back to my apartment in Chicago. Around midnight, I heard movement downstairs. Thinking it might be Grandma needing something, I crept down the hallway. But instead of finding her awake, I discovered Mom sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at a pile of papers. "Can't sleep either?" I asked, startling her. "Oh, Katie, I didn't hear you come down." She gestured to the papers. "Just going through some of Mom's old documents, trying to make sure we haven't missed anything important." I sat down across from her. The papers were mostly old receipts, insurance forms, and medical bills. Nothing that looked particularly significant. "Mom, what did Grandma mean earlier when she said there were things you didn't know?" Mom shrugged, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "Your grandmother's been getting confused lately. Sometimes she thinks it's 1960 and your grandfather is still alive. Yesterday she asked me when my brother Tommy was coming home from Vietnam. But she seemed so clear when she said it, so determined. Honey, I've been handling her affairs for 2 years. I've seen every bank statement, every bill, every document in this house. If there was anything of value, I would have found it by now." Mom's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting an uphill battle for too long. I wanted to argue, but looking at the dark circles under her eyes, I kept quiet. Mom had been carrying this burden alone while Dad worked extra hours to help with expenses, and I'd been 8 hours away, buried in my own problems. The next morning brought more bad news. Beverly pulled us aside while Grandma was sleeping. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but she's declining faster than expected. Dr. Morrison thinks it might be a matter of days now, not weeks." Mom broke down crying, and Dad wrapped his arms around her. I felt numb, like I was watching everything happen from somewhere far away. This couldn't be real. Grandma Rose had always been the strongest person I knew. But as the day wore on, it became clear that Beverly was right. Grandma slept most of the time, waking only for brief moments. When she did wake up, she seemed confused about where she was and who we were. "Is that you, Patricia?" she asked Mom around dinner time. "When did you get so old?" "I'm 62, Mom. It's 2023. Grandma frowned, like she was trying to solve a difficult puzzle. "That can't be right. Patricia is only 16. She's supposed to be home from school by now." It broke my heart to see her like this. The woman who had taught me to bake, who had listened to all my teenage problems without judgment, who had cheered the loudest at my college graduation, was slipping away piece by piece. That night, I stayed up with her while Mom and Dad tried to get some sleep. The house was quiet except for the steady hum of the oxygen machine and the occasional car passing by on the street outside. Around 3 in the morning, Grandma's eyes opened suddenly. She looked right at me, and for a moment, she was completely lucid. "Katie," she whispered urgently. "The lawyer. Make sure you talk to the lawyer." "What lawyer, Grandma?" "Johnson. Theodore Johnson. His card is in my jewelry box upstairs. Promise me you'll call him." "I promise, but what's this about?" She gripped my hand tighter than I thought possible. "Your parents don't know everything. I never told them because I didn't want them to worry about money instead of loving me for who I am." Before I could ask what she meant, her eyes closed again and she drifted back into unconsciousness. I sat there for the rest of the night, her words echoing in my mind. What could she possibly mean? What didn't my parents know? As dawn broke through the curtains, I made a decision. As soon as it was a reasonable hour, I was going upstairs to find that jewelry box and locate Theodore Johnson's card. The old wooden jewelry box sat on Grandma's dresser like it had for as long as I could remember. The purple velvet lining was faded, and the tiny ballerina that used to spin to Fur Elise had long since stopped working. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside were the usual suspects. A few pairs of earrings, some old brooches, a couple of watches that hadn't worked in years. But tucked beneath the bottom compartment, I found a small white business card that looked much newer than everything else. Theodore Johnson, attorney at law, estate planning and probate. The address showed an office in downtown Cleveland, about an hour's drive from Pine Valley. I stared at the card, trying to make sense of it. Why would Grandma have a lawyer's card hidden in her jewelry box? Mom had been handling all her affairs through their family attorney, Mr. Peterson, who'd been taking care of simple wills and minor legal matters in Pine Valley for 30 years. The sound of voices downstairs pulled me from my thoughts. I slipped the card into my pocket and hurried down to find Dr. Morrison talking quietly with my parents in the kitchen. "I'm sorry," he was saying as I entered, "but she's not responsive this morning. Her breathing is becoming more labored. Mom's face was pale. How long do we have? It's hard to say exactly, but I'd estimate hours rather than days. The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls to relatives, hushed conversations, and the constant presence of Beverly checking Grandma's vital signs. Aunts, uncles, and cousins began arriving from across Ohio and neighboring states. Uncle Robert drove up from Cincinnati with his wife Linda. Aunt Carol came from Toledo with her 2 grown sons. The house filled with the sounds of quiet crying, shared memories, and the distinctive smell of casseroles that neighbors had started dropping off. Through it all, I kept thinking about that business card in my pocket. Every time I considered mentioning it to my parents, something held me back. They were dealing with enough right now. If it turned out to be nothing important, why add to their stress? Around noon, while everyone was gathered in the living room sharing stories about Grandma, I slipped outside and dialed the number on the card. Johnson and Associates, answered a professional female voice. Hi, I need to speak with Theodore Johnson. It's about Rose Williams. One moment, please. After a brief hold, a deep male voice came on the line. This is Ted Johnson. Are you calling about Mrs. Williams? Yes, I'm her granddaughter, Katie. She asked me to call you. There was a pause. I see. Is Mrs. Williams, has she passed? Not yet, but it's very close now. She told me there were things my parents didn't know about. Something about money. Another pause, longer this time. Miss Williams, this isn't a conversation we should have over the phone. Can you come to my office today? Today? I don't know if I can leave right now. I understand this is a difficult time, but Mrs. Williams was very specific in her instructions. She said when the time came, I should speak with you immediately. It's important. Something in his tone convinced me. Okay, I can be there in about an hour. I'll be waiting. I hung up and stared at the phone, my mind racing. What could be so urgent that a lawyer I'd never heard of needed to see me today of all days? Back inside, I found Mom sitting beside Grandma's bed, holding her hand and humming an old lullaby. Grandma's breathing was shallow and irregular. Mom, I need to run an errand in Cleveland. I'll be back as soon as I can. She looked up, surprised. Today? Katie, I don't think you should leave now. It's important. Something Grandma asked me to do. Dad appeared in the doorway. What kind of errand? I hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. She gave me a lawyer's card and asked me to call him. He wants to see me today. A lawyer? Mom frowned. What lawyer? We've been using Peterson for everything. His name is Theodore Johnson. He's in Cleveland. Mom and Dad exchanged glances. I've never heard of him, Dad said. Why would your grandmother have a Cleveland lawyer? I don't know, but she was very insistent. Said it was important. Honey, your grandmother's been confused. This is probably some old business that doesn't matter anymore. But something in Grandma's urgency the night before convinced me this was real. I have to go. She made me promise. The drive to Cleveland felt endless. My old Honda struggled up the hills on Route 77, and I found myself gripping the steering wheel the same way I had driving to see Grandma 3 days earlier. The difference was, this time I had no idea what I was driving toward. Theodore Johnson's office was in a modern building downtown, very different from the small-town law offices I was used to. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled gray hair, showed me to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Erie. Mr. Johnson entered a few minutes later. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Miss Williams, thank you for coming. Please sit down. He placed a thick manila folder on the conference table and sat across from me. First, let me say how sorry I am about your grandmother's condition. Mrs. Williams is a remarkable woman. Thank you. But I have to ask, how do you know my grandmother? My parents have never mentioned you. Mr. Johnson nodded. That's because your grandmother specifically asked me never to contact your parents directly. All our communication has been through her, and she's been very clear that certain information should remain confidential until after her death. What information? He opened the folder and pulled out several documents. Miss Williams, your grandmother has been my client for 15 years. She came to me originally for estate planning, but over the years, our relationship has involved much more complex financial management. I stared at him. Financial management? But my parents said she has no money left. The house is mortgaged. There are medical bills. That's what your grandmother wanted them to believe. The words hit me like a physical blow. What do you mean? Mr. Johnson pulled out a sheet of paper and slid it across the table. It looked like a bank statement, but the numbers didn't make sense. Your grandmother owns assets worth approximately $2.8 million. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. I'm sorry, what? $2.8 million. The bulk of it is in carefully diversified investments, some in real estate holdings, and about $300,000 in liquid savings. The room seemed to spin around me. That's impossible. She's been struggling to pay medical bills. My parents have been stressed about money for years. Your grandmother has been paying all her medical expenses and maintaining the mortgage payments. The financial stress your parents experienced was artificial, created deliberately by Mrs. Williams to maintain the illusion that she had no significant assets. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. The lake stretched out endlessly, gray and choppy under the overcast sky. Why would she do that? Why would she let my parents worry and struggle when she had all this money? She explained it to me once. She said she'd seen too many families destroyed by money, children who stopped calling unless they needed something, grandchildren who only visited when they wanted an inheritance. She wanted to be loved for herself, not for what she could provide. I turned back to face him. But that's crazy. My parents aren't like that. They've been taking care of her for years, which proved to her that her plan was working. Your parents' love and care was genuine because they believed they were helping someone who had nothing left to give them. The magnitude of what he was telling me was overwhelming. So all those years of her clipping coupons, of buying generic groceries, of worrying about heating bills, all an act. A very convincing one, I'll admit. Mrs. Williams is quite the actress. I sank back into my chair. This is insane. How did she even get this money? Mr. Johnson pulled out another document. Your grandmother was much more financially savvy than anyone realized. After your grandfather died in 1967, she received a modest life insurance payout, about $15,000. Instead of spending it on immediate needs, she invested it. In 1967, a widow with 5 children invested instead of paying bills. She was working 2 jobs and managing to cover the basics. She took that $15,000 and put it into stocks that her brother recommended. He worked for a brokerage firm in Cleveland. Uncle Jimmy. I remember him. Over the years, she made additional investments. Small amounts at first, but she had a natural instinct for picking good companies. She bought IBM in the early 70s, Microsoft in the 80s, Apple in the 90s. Every time one of her investments did well, she'd reinvest the profits. I stared at the bank statement again. The numbers were real. How has she been hiding this from my parents? Very carefully. She set up all her investment accounts with my office as the mailing address. She's been using a small local checking account for day-to-day expenses, which your mother monitors. But she's been transferring money from her investment accounts to cover the mortgage and medical bills through a separate account your parents don't know about. This is unbelievable. There's more. Mr. Johnson pulled out another document. Your grandmother also owns 4 rental properties in Cleveland. She bought them starting in the 1980s when real estate was cheap. They're all fully paid off now and generate about $6,000 a month in rental income. My head was spinning. 4 rental properties? How is that even possible? Your grandmother made regular trips to Cleveland over the years. Your family thought she was visiting friends or going shopping. Actually, she was meeting with me, checking on her properties, and managing her investments. Those weekend trips to see her friend Dorothy. Dorothy was real, but Mrs. Williams usually spent most of her time in Cleveland on business. I sat in stunned silence for several minutes, trying to process everything. My sweet grandmother, who I'd always seen as a simple woman who'd struggled her whole life, was actually a secret millionaire. Why are you telling me this now? I finally asked. Because yesterday morning, Mrs. Williams called me and said it was time. She wanted me to explain everything to you specifically. Why me and not my parents? Mr. Johnson smiled slightly. She said you were the one who inherited her practical nature and her ability to keep a secret when necessary. She also said you were the most like her at that age, willing to take risks and think outside the box. But what am I supposed to do with this information? She's still alive, She's given you a choice. He slid a final document across the table. This is a power of attorney that she had drawn up 6 months ago. It gives you complete control over her finances, effective immediately upon her written request. I stared at the document, my name typed neatly at the top. She wants you to decide how to handle the money. You can continue the charade, keeping the wealth secret even after she passes. You can reveal everything to your family now. Or you can find some middle ground that feels right to you. What does she want me to do? She wouldn't tell me. She said this was your decision to make, and she trusts your judgment completely. I looked out at the lake again, my mind reeling. Less than an hour ago, I was part of a family preparing to say goodbye to a beloved grandmother who had nothing left to give but her love. Now I was sitting in a lawyer's office, learning that same grandmother was secretly wealthy and had put me in charge of a fortune I never knew existed. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Come home soon. She's asking for you. I stood up, still clutching the power of attorney. I need to think about this. Of course. But Miss Williams, there is one time-sensitive matter. If you decide to continue keeping the secret, certain arrangements need to be made before your grandmother passes. The properties need to be transferred, the investment accounts need to be restructured, and there are tax implications to consider. How long do I have? He looked at his watch. Based on what you've told me about her condition, we probably need a decision within the next few hours. I nodded, my heart pounding. I'll call you. Miss Williams, whatever you decide, your grandmother was very clear that she's proud of you and she trusts you to do the right thing. As I drove back toward Pine Valley, my mind was chaos. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my grandmother, about our financial situation, had been turned upside down in the span of an hour. The question that kept repeating in my head was simple but impossible to answer. What would be the right thing to do? The house was quieter when I returned from Cleveland. Several of the relatives had stepped outside for fresh air, and the living room felt less crowded. Mom was still sitting beside Grandma's bed, but now Uncle Robert was there too, holding Grandma's other hand. How is she? I asked softly. Mom looked up with red-rimmed eyes. She woke up about an hour ago and asked for you. She seemed really agitated when I told her you weren't here. Guilt washed over me. Here I was learning about secret fortunes, while my grandmother was dying and asking for me. She's sleeping again now, Uncle Robert added, but her breathing is getting weaker. I sat down in the chair across from Mom and studied Grandma's face. Even in sleep, she looked peaceful. How had she managed to keep such an enormous secret for 15 years? How had she acted worried about money while sitting on millions of dollars? Katie, what did that lawyer want? Dad appeared in the doorway, still wearing his work boots and flannel shirt. He'd obviously just gotten home from a job site. I felt the weight of the power of attorney document in my purse. Just some old paperwork he needed to clear up. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it felt wrong saying it. These were my parents. They'd spent years worrying about Grandma's finances, taking money from their own retirement savings to help with her expenses. They deserved to know the truth. But then I thought about what Mr. Johnson had said. Grandma had been testing them, making sure their love was real. And it was. They'd proven it over and over again. What kind of paperwork? Mom pressed. Before I could answer, Grandma's eyes fluttered open. She looked around the room slowly, as if trying to remember where she was. When her gaze landed on me, her face brightened. Katie, you went to see him. Yes, Grandma. I went. Mom and Dad exchanged glances. See who? Mom asked. The lawyer, Grandma said clearly, her voice stronger than it had been all day. I told Katie to see the lawyer. Mom, what lawyer are you talking about? Dad's voice carried a note of frustration. We've got Peterson handling everything. Grandma's eyes moved from me to my parents and back again. I could see her trying to decide something. Patricia, Michael, she said, using their formal names the way she did when she had something important to say. Sit down. Both of you. Mom, you should rest, Mom protested. I've been resting for weeks. Right now, I need to talk. There was a steel in her voice I hadn't heard since I was a child being scolded for tracking mud through the house. Reluctantly, my parents sat down. Uncle Robert started to leave, but Grandma stopped him. Robert, you stay too. This affects the whole family. I felt my heart racing. Was she going to tell them everything? Was she going to put me in the position of confirming her story? 56 years ago, Grandma began, her voice growing stronger with each word. Your father died in that accident at the plant. Left me with 5 children and $15,000 in life insurance money. Mom nodded. We know the story, Mom. No, you don't. You know part of it. Grandma's eyes were sharp now, more focused than I'd seen them in days. I told everyone I spent that money on bills and groceries and school clothes. That's what everyone expected a poor widow to do. Dad leaned forward. What did you actually do with it? I invested it. The room went completely silent. Even the background hum of the medical equipment seemed to fade away. You what? Mom whispered. I took that $15,000 and I invested it in the stock market. My brother Jimmy helped me set up the account. Uncle Robert's eyes widened. Uncle Jimmy knew about this? Jimmy's been dead for 20 years, but yes, he knew. He was the only one. I watched my parents' faces as they tried to process this information. Mom looked confused, like she was trying to solve a math problem that didn't add up. Dad just looked stunned. Mom said slowly, you always told us you didn't trust banks or investments. You said they were for rich people, not people like us. I lied. Grandma's words fell into the room like stones dropped in still water. I lied because I needed everyone to think I was poor. Why would you need that? Dad's voice was barely above a whisper. Grandma was quiet for a long moment, her eyes moving from face to face. When she spoke again, her voice was soft but clear. Because I watched what money did to the Henderson family down the street. Old man Henderson left his children a bunch of money when he died, and those children spent the next 10 years fighting over it. Brothers and sisters who'd been close their whole lives stopped speaking to each other. Grandchildren were used as weapons in court battles. She paused, struggling for breath before continuing. I watched the Murphy family too. When Margaret Murphy inherited her mother's house, suddenly she had cousins coming out of the woodwork, all wanting their fair share of something they'd never cared about when the old woman was alive. Mom was shaking her head. But Mom, we're not like that. We've never cared about your money. I know that now, Grandma said with a sad smile. It took me years to be sure, but I know it now. You've been taking care of me because you love me, not because you want something from me. Of course we love you, Dad said, his voice cracking. Money has nothing to do with it. I know, and that's why I can tell you the truth now. Uncle Robert cleared his throat. Mom, exactly how much money are we talking about? Grandma looked at me. Katie, tell them what Mr. Johnson told you. All eyes turned to me. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump into unknown waters. Almost $3 million, I said quietly. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't confusion or surprise. This was shock so complete that nobody could even form words. Finally, Mom spoke. $3 million. I nodded. Plus 4 rental properties in Cleveland. Dad stood up abruptly and walked to the window, running his hands through his gray hair. Uncle Robert just stared at Grandma like he'd never seen her before. How? Mom asked. How is that even possible? IBM, Grandma said with a slight smile. Microsoft. Apple. Amazon. I may have acted like a simple old woman, but I read the financial pages every day. When I saw a company that made something people needed, something that would only get more important over time, I bought their stock. All those trips to Cleveland, Mom said, understanding dawning in her voice. You weren't just visiting Dorothy. Dorothy was part of it. But mostly I was meeting with my lawyer and checking on my properties. Dad turned back from the window. Properties? You own buildings in Cleveland. 4 apartment buildings. Small ones, but in good neighborhoods. I bought them when prices were low and fixed them up over the years. This is insane, Uncle Robert muttered. Completely insane. Mom was crying now, but I couldn't tell if it was from relief, anger, or just overwhelming emotion. Mom, do you have any idea what the last 2 years have been like? Watching you worry about paying for medication, seeing you choose between heating the house and buying groceries. I never actually chose, Grandma said gently. I just made it look like I was choosing. But why? Dad's voice carried a note of anger now. Why put us through that? Why let us worry and stress and lose sleep over your finances when you had millions of dollars sitting in the bank? Because I needed to know, Grandma said simply. I needed to know that when everything was stripped away, when I had nothing left to offer but my love, you would still be here. Of course we'd still be here, Mom said, her voice rising. How could you even question that? Because I've seen families destroyed by money, Patricia. I've seen children who only call when they need something. I've seen grandchildren who visit once a year and spend the whole time asking about wills and inheritances. Grandma's breathing was getting labored again, but she continued. I wanted to be sure that when you took care of me, when you visited me, when you worried about me, it was because you loved me, not because you were protecting an investment. The room fell quiet again. I could see my parents trying to understand, trying to reconcile this revelation with everything they thought they knew about their mother. So what happens now? Uncle Robert asked. What happens to all this money? Grandma looked at me again. That's up to Katie. What do you mean it's up to Katie? Mom asked. I've given her power of attorney over all my assets. She gets to decide how to handle everything. Now my parents were staring at me with the same shocked expression they'd had when learning about the money. Grandma, I said, I don't want that responsibility. This should be a family decision. It is a family decision. Your family. And you're the one I trust to do the right thing. But why Katie? Dad asked. Why not Patricia or Robert or one of the other children? Grandma smiled weakly. Because Katie reminds me of myself at that age. She's practical. She's not afraid to take risks. And she understands that money is just a tool. It's not good or bad by itself. It's what you do with it that matters. I felt the weight of everyone's expectations settling on my shoulders. $3 million. For properties. A family that had been kept in the dark for 15 years. I need time to think about this, I said. How much time do we have? Mom asked. Beverly, the nurse, had been standing quietly in the hallway, giving us privacy but staying close enough to monitor Grandma's condition. She stepped forward now. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mrs. Williams needs to rest. This much excitement isn't good for her heart. Grandma reached out and grabbed my hand one more time. Katie, whatever you decide, I want you to know I'm proud of you. And I'm proud of all my children and grandchildren. You've shown me that I raised good people who understand that love is more valuable than money. As Beverly helped adjust Grandma's pillows and checked her vital signs, the family gradually dispersed. Some went outside for air. Others went to the kitchen to process what they just learned. I stayed by Grandma's bedside, holding her hand as she drifted back to sleep. But my mind was racing. I had perhaps hours to make a decision that would affect my entire family's future. Do I keep the money secret as Grandma had, gradually revealing it over time? Do I distribute it immediately and openly? Do I use it to take care of the family's immediate needs and save the rest for emergencies? And underlying all of these practical questions was a deeper one: what would really be the best thing for my family? As I sat there watching my grandmother sleep, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, I realized that this decision wasn't just about money. It was about what kind of family we wanted to be going forward. The question was, what would honor both Grandma's wishes and my family's needs? Grandma Rose passed away peacefully at 4:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in October. I was holding her hand when her breathing finally stopped, and despite everything we'd been through over the past few days, her face looked serene. Mom and Dad were asleep upstairs, exhausted from 3 days of barely leaving her side. Uncle Robert had driven back to Cincinnati the night before to handle some work emergency, planning to return for the funeral. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Beverly confirmed what I already knew, then made the necessary phone calls. Within an hour, the funeral home staff arrived, and suddenly the living room felt empty without the hospital bed and medical equipment. By noon, the house was full of family members who'd driven through the night to be here. Aunt Carol arrived with her sons Tommy and Brian. Cousin Jennifer flew in from Denver. Uncle Robert turned around and came back with his whole family. The kitchen table was covered with casseroles, pies, and sandwich platters that neighbors had been dropping off since dawn. It's funny how food becomes the universal language of comfort during times like these. But underneath all the normal grief and family gathering was an undercurrent of tension. Everyone knew about Grandma's secret now. Word had spread quickly through phone calls and whispered conversations. I found myself at the center of uncomfortable attention. People kept looking at me differently, like I was somehow changed by having power of attorney over millions of dollars. Cousin Jennifer, who I hadn't seen in 3 years, suddenly wanted to know all about my job in Chicago and whether I was planning to move back to Ohio. Uncle Robert pulled me aside around 2 o'clock. "Katie, we need to talk about the practical stuff. The lawyer, the properties, the investments. There are probably tax implications, estate planning issues." "I know. Mr. Johnson said he'd handle all the legal requirements." "That's good, but what about the family? What's your plan?" I looked around the living room at all these people I loved, people who were dealing with grief while also trying to process the revelation that their mother, grandmother, or sister had been secretly wealthy for 15 years. "I don't know yet, Uncle Robert. I'm still figuring it out." "Well, you need to figure it out soon. Money sitting around like that, it changes things. Whether you want it to or not." He was right, and I could already see the changes happening. Conversation stopped when I walked into a room. People were being extra nice to me, offering to help with things I could handle myself. Even Mom and Dad seemed uncertain about how to act around me now. That evening, after most of the relatives had gone back to their hotels or driven home, I sat down with my parents at the kitchen table. It was just the 3 of us, like so many evenings when I was growing up. "We need to talk about what happens next," I said. Mom nodded. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and her gray hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Katie, I want you to know that whatever you decide, we'll support you. This was your grandmother's choice, and we respect that. But I can see it's already causing problems. The family is acting weird around me. Dad's side. People get strange when money's involved, honey. Even good people. Even family. That's exactly why Grandma kept it secret in the first place. So what are you thinking?" Mom asked. I pulled out a notebook where I'd been writing down ideas. I've been making lists, trying to figure out what would be best for everyone. "Show us," Dad said. I flipped to the first page. Option 1. Keep everything exactly like Grandma did. Continue the investments, manage the properties, but don't tell anyone else in the family. Use the money quietly to help people when they need it, but make it look like it's coming from somewhere else. "That seems dishonest," Mom said. "After what we've been through, I don't want any more secrets." Option 2. Distribute everything equally among Grandma's children. Split it 5 ways between you, Uncle Robert, Aunt Carol, Aunt Linda, and Uncle James. Dad shook his head. "Your grandmother gave this to you, not to us. If she wanted us to have it, she would have set it up that way." Option 3. Use some of it for immediate family needs, save some for emergencies, and donate some to charity. Try to balance taking care of everyone with honoring Grandma's values. "What kind of immediate needs?" Mom asked. I flipped to another page in my notebook. "Well, you and Dad have been putting off retirement because of money worries. Uncle Robert's been struggling since the plant closed last year. Aunt Carol's been working 2 jobs to help pay for Brian's college." "And what kind of charities?" Dad asked. "Things Grandma cared about. She always donated to the food bank, even when she was pretending to be broke. She volunteered at the literacy center. She helped pay for school supplies for kids whose families couldn't afford them." Mom was quiet for a long moment. "What does your gut tell you, Katie?" "My gut tells me that Grandma was right about money changing people, but she was also wrong about some things. She didn't need to keep us in the dark for 15 years to prove we loved her. We could have handled knowing the truth. So what would you do differently?" I closed the notebook and looked at both of them. "I want to do something that honors her memory, but also takes care of the family in a way that feels honest and fair." "What does that look like?" I took a deep breath. I'd been thinking about this for hours, and I'd finally come to a decision that felt right. First, I want to pay off everyone's mortgages. Quietly, anonymously if possible. You and Dad, Uncle Robert, Aunt Carol, everyone in the immediate family. Grandma always said the most important thing was having a roof over your head that nobody could take away. Dad's eyes filled with tears. "Katie, that would change everything for us." Second, I want to set up college funds for all the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Brian, Tommy's kids, Jennifer's daughter, all of them. Education was important to Grandma, even though she never had much of it herself. "That's beautiful," Mom said softly. Third, I want to keep one of the rental properties and use the income to fund a scholarship program at the local high school. For kids who are smart and hardworking but whose families can't afford college. She would have loved that, Dad said. Fourth, I want to donate a significant amount to the causes Grandma supported. The food bank, the literacy center, maybe start a program to help single mothers with job training. And what about the rest? Mom asked. The rest stays invested. I'll manage it the way Grandma did, carefully and conservatively. It becomes a safety net for the family. If someone has a medical emergency, if someone loses their job, if someone's house burns down, the money is there to help. I paused, making sure they understood the most important part. But here's the key. Everyone knows about it. No more secrets. The family knows there's money available if they really need it, but it's not just sitting there waiting to be divided up. It has a purpose. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. That sounds like something your grandmother would be proud of. You really think so? I know so. You found a way to take care of people without spoiling them. You found a way to honor her memory while being honest with the family. Dad nodded. It's going to be a lot of responsibility, Katie. Managing investments, making decisions about who needs help and when. I know, but I'll have help. Mr. Johnson can handle the legal stuff. I can hire a financial advisor. And I can ask for input from family members when I need to make big decisions. Over the next week, as we planned Grandma's funeral and dealt with all the practical details that follow a death, I started putting my plan into action. The funeral was beautiful. The whole town of Pine Valley seemed to show up to pay their respects to Rose Williams, the woman they remembered as a hard-working widow who'd raised 5 children and always had time to help her neighbors. They had no idea they were also mourning a secret philanthropist and savvy investor. Pastor Williams, no relation despite the name, spoke about Grandma's generosity and her love for her family. Mrs. Henderson from down the street told stories about how Grandma used to bring soup when people were sick and always remembered everyone's birthdays. What struck me most was listening to all these stories about small acts of kindness. Grandma had been helping people her whole life, even when everyone thought she had nothing to give. The money had just been another tool for her to care for others. After the funeral, I met with Mr. Johnson to start implementing my plan. He was impressed with the thoughtfulness of my approach. Your grandmother chose well, he said as we went over the paperwork. This plan balances generosity with responsibility. It takes care of people without creating dependency. I hope so. I keep worrying I'm making the wrong choices. Miss Williams, there's no perfect way to handle a situation like this, but you're approaching it with the same wisdom and caring that your grandmother showed her whole life. That's what matters. The hardest part was figuring out how to pay off everyone's mortgages without making them feel uncomfortable about accepting such a large gift. I worked with Mr. Johnson to structure it through a family trust, making it clear that this was Grandma's money being used according to her wishes, not my personal generosity. Uncle Robert cried when I told him his house was paid off. He'd been facing foreclosure since losing his job, and the stress had been affecting his health. Katie, I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me. Thank Grandma. This is her gift to all of us. Aunt Carol had a similar reaction. She'd been working nights as a security guard and days as a cashier, trying to keep up with her mortgage payments and help with Brian's college expenses. I can quit the night job, she said, tears streaming down her face. I haven't slept a full night in 2 years. Mom and Dad were the easiest to help because they'd been involved in the decision-making process from the beginning. Dad could finally retire from construction, work that was getting harder on his aging body. Mom could stop worrying about their retirement savings and start thinking about things they might want to do with their remaining years. Setting up the scholarship program took longer, but it was one of the most rewarding parts of the whole process. I worked with a high school guidance counselor to identify students who had strong grades and clear goals but limited financial resources. The first recipient was Maria Santos, whose parents worked at the local chicken processing plant. She wanted to study nursing but couldn't afford the community college program. The scholarship covered her tuition, books, and even a small living stipend, so she wouldn't have to work full-time while going to school. I never thought college was possible for someone like me, Maria told me when I presented her with the award. Your grandmother's gift is changing my whole life. That's when I knew I'd made the right decision. The rental properties in Cleveland were generating steady income, which I used to fund ongoing charitable giving and to build up the family emergency fund. I hired a property management company to handle the day-to-day operations, but I visited the buildings regularly to make sure they were being maintained properly. One of my tenants, an elderly man named Walter, reminded me a lot of Grandma. He'd been living in the same apartment for 15 years, always paying his rent on time despite being on a fixed income. "Your grandmother was a good landlord," he told me during one of my visits. "Fair but kind. When my wife was sick, she let me pay rent late for 3 months without charging penalties. She never mentioned that. She wouldn't. That was her way. She helped people without making a big show of it. As the months passed, I settled into a routine of managing Grandma's legacy. I was still living in Chicago, still working at the advertising agency, but I made regular trips to Ohio to check on the properties and the family. The family dynamic had stabilized, too. The initial awkwardness around money had faded as people got used to the new reality. More importantly, the financial stress that had been affecting everyone was gone. Uncle Robert found a new job and was able to focus on his work instead of worrying about losing his house. Aunt Carol went back to school to get certified as a medical technician. Brian graduated college debt-free and started working as an engineer. But the best part was watching how the family came together in new ways. With money worries removed, family gatherings became more relaxed and joyful. People felt free to be generous with each other, knowing that everyone's basic needs were secure. On the first anniversary of Grandma's death, we all gathered at the cemetery to visit her grave. Someone had placed fresh flowers there, and I suspected it was one of her old neighbors who still remembered her kindness. "Do you think she knew?" Cousin Jennifer asked as we stood around the headstone. "Do you think she knew how everything would turn out?" "I think she hoped," Mom said. "I think she trusted that love would find a way to make it work." Uncle Robert put his arm around my shoulders. "Katie, I want you to know that you've done something amazing with Grandma's gift. You've managed to take care of everyone without spoiling anyone. You've kept the family together instead of letting money tear us apart." "Grandma deserves the credit," I said. "I just tried to follow her example." "No," Dad said firmly. "Grandma set up the situation, but you made the choices that mattered. You chose generosity over selfishness. You chose transparency over secrecy. You chose to trust your family instead of testing them." As we walked back to our cars, I thought about all the ways my life had changed since that day when I first drove to Pine Valley thinking I was saying goodbye to a grandmother who had nothing left to give. Grandma Rose had taught me that love and money don't have to be enemies. She'd shown me that wealth is a responsibility, not just a privilege. Most importantly, she demonstrated that the greatest gift you can give someone isn't money itself, but the security and freedom that money can provide when used wisely. The secret fortune that she'd hidden for 15 years had become a foundation for the family's future. Not because we were now wealthy, but because we were now free to love each other without the stress and worry that financial insecurity brings. 6 months later, I made a decision that surprised even me. I quit my job in Chicago and moved back to Pine Valley. I'd realized that managing Grandma's legacy wasn't just about money. It was about staying connected to family, staying rooted in the values she taught us, and continuing her quiet tradition of helping others. I bought a small house 3 blocks from where Grandma used to live, and I set up an office there to manage the investments and charitable giving. It wasn't the career path I'd planned, but it felt like exactly where I needed to be. Sometimes, when I'm working late reviewing scholarship applications or checking on the rental properties, I imagine Grandma looking over my shoulder, maybe nodding in approval or suggesting a better approach to a problem. I think she'd be proud of what her hidden fortune became. Not just because it helped so many people, but because it brought our family closer together instead of driving us apart. Her final gift wasn't really the money at all. It was the trust she placed in me to do the right thing, and the confidence that love is stronger than greed when you give it a chance to prove itself. The lawyer had revealed her hidden fortune, but Grandma Rose had revealed something even more valuable, that a family built on genuine love and care can handle any challenge, even unexpected wealth, as long as they remember what matters most. As I turned off the lights in my office that night, I whispered a quiet thank you to the woman who taught me that the best inheritance isn't what you leave behind, but the values you pass on and the love you share while you're still here to enjoy it. Grandma Rose Williams had been poor and rich, secret and honest, testing and trusting. But most of all, she'd been wise enough to know that money is just a tool and love is what gives it meaning. Her hidden fortune had found its purpose at last.